Okay, lesson two, Cold War. Welcome back. Still Mr. Kits, hasn't changed yet. So today we're going to be talking about what's going to go on in Europe, especially at the beginning of this Cold War, and we're really going to focus in on Germany. So as you can see here, our do now today talks about an Iron Curtain, and if you look at the little image there, right, you can kind of see like that big iron wall, right? So if you think of a curtain usually divides like a room or divides something. And most of our curtains are some sort of fabric. They're easy to get through. But if a curtain was iron, it's actually more like a wall, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about here. What's going to happen, and you can see on the map here, is that Europe is sort of going to be divided into two. All right. So if you're seeing, right, all the stuff in green on the what's the west, and once again, if you remember from my last lecture there, I said anything that's in the west, okay. And if you're confused here, the compass rose is in the top left-hand corner here, right, north, south, east, west, okay. But everything to the left, everything in the west is going to be aligned with the United States. And everything in the east here, in the orange or whatever you want to call it, is going to be aligned with the Soviet Union. So, post World War II, when we're talking about the Cold War, we're talking about a time when Europe is essentially going to be cut in half. You're going to have the western side and you're going to have the eastern side. And everything in the West is going to be aligned with the US capitalism, democracy, pretty much all the stuff that you know and enjoy, freedom of speech, freedom of press, all that kind of stuff. Everything that you know about your life today would be going on in these countries over here in the green. Everything in the orange, that's going to be a different story. That's going to be like living under a dictator, like living under Joseph Stalin, where there is no freedom of speech, there is no freedom of press. See, you are under a dictator. If you go against him, you can kind of say goodbye, right? It's over. Okay? So, the Iron Curtain goes up. Stalin feels that Russia needs a buffer from Western Europe. Now, if you think Russia's been attacked multiple times, they've been attacked in World War One, they were obviously attacked in World War Two. He decides that all of this stuff in here, all of Eastern Europe, okay, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, all of these countries are going to act as satellite states or buffer states. They're going to act as sort of the like a buffer, like if you were to set up something to stop you from being attacked, right? So if we were in the classroom and we knew that somebody was coming in, right? Let's say there was an MMA fighter coming in to try to punch me in the face. The concept would be I would want a buffer. I would want something to stop that attack. Okay, so Stalin is looking at these states here as being his buffer, his way of sort of separating himself from the West, from Western Europe. Okay, so now specifically in Germany, do we see this? And this is going to play out on a very grand scale in Germany. So as you can see here, Western Germany and Eastern Germany are going to be cut. Okay, so they're going to take Germany, they're going to cut it in half. The western side is going to be controlled by the US, France, and Britain, which will mean it will have democracy. It'll be capitalist. The eastern side will be controlled by Russia, by the Soviet Union. And even within, okay, so if you look, right, within the eastern zone here is the capital city of Berlin. That would be like the equivalent of Washington, D.C. to us, or New York City to us. However, that city is sitting right in the middle of the Soviet zone. And that city, as you can see in this bottom picture here, is also cut in half. So the western side here of Berlin is going to be capitalist and controlled by America, Britain, and France. It's mainly going to be America, but you have to remember Britain and France are involved in this whole process. And the eastern side of Berlin is going to be controlled by the Soviets. Okay? So what do? Well, Germany and Berlin are going to be cut. As I mentioned before, Western Germany, Western Berlin, right? You see it on the map here. They're going to be controlled by the US. And Eastern Germany and Eastern Berlin are going to be cut and basically going to be controlled by the Soviets. They are going to be communist. Okay? Now, you've probably heard of something called the Berlin Wall. And the Berlin Wall is important because the Berlin Wall was built at this time period. And it essentially pops up overnight. And the Berlin Wall is not one of these walls to keep people out. Okay, so like you might hear about, say, wanting to build a wall on the southern border of the US. And one of the reasons why they want to build a wall on the southern border is to separate or keep people out from coming in. They want them to come in either through legal checkpoints or whatever. The Great Wall of China was built to keep the Mongols out. Well, the Berlin Wall is a little different. The Berlin Wall is actually built to keep the people of East Germany in. So this is a little bit of a different thing. It'd be like, instead of building like a wall around a castle to keep people from invading it, you're building a wall around a castle to keep the people who are in that castle from leaving. And why would you feel like you would need to build a wall to keep people in? If things are going well, do you want to stay in a place? Of course you do. If I'm making a ton of money, if I'm happy with my life, if I'm doing really well and eating steak dinners and my life is going amazing, why would I want to leave? Well, the reason why you have people leaving is because life is so bad in East Berlin and so good in West Berlin. And that kind of makes sense because remember, who's funding Western Berlin? That's the United States. And the United States has a lot of money. And they're pumping money into West Berlin. They're building restaurants. They're building bars. They're building all of these different stores and shops. They're making it an exciting place to be. Versus East Berlin, where you have really nothing. People go to work and they come home, okay? So, the Berlin Wall gets built, and essentially it gets built overnight. And you can see from this picture here, it is not going to be an easy thing to get through. It's not like, a little fence in the back where, you can easily jump over it. This is going to be a heavily, heavily guarded wall. And people will die trying to get up, over, under, and around this wall. Okay? This picture right here, this is an interesting one coming up. This is toward the end of the Berlin Wall. Okay, so this is probably one of the last days. These are the old Soviet guards of East Berlin standing on the top of the wall, and these are the people of West Berlin kind of waving the new German flag. Okay, so this is kind of toward the end of the Berlin Wall era. Okay, and there is a clip. I'm actually going to have you watch 2 clips here. I'm going to post those right after this. And they're really good, so make sure you watch them. They really kind of go over the wall and everything within the wall. Now, just from this picture here in the bottom right of this slide, you can see the Berlin Wall, it's not just a wall. There's actually a lot to the middle of this wall as well. Okay, if you somehow made it past one side of the wall, there were guards. There were electrified fences. There was alarm set fences. So if you were to cut your way into the wall and get into the middle of this wall, it would alert guards. There were landmines in some places. There was this thing called Stalinrasen, which is actually like something to the effect of like 3-inch spikes that used to be laid out across the ground. So if you step on a 3-inch spike, think about that. It's going to ruin your day, if nothing else. So, and if you got past that, then you had to get past, there was, like I said, there was guards with guns. There was an area that was like raked every day, so they knew if people were walking through that area. There was all sorts of deterrence from you trying to get past and through this wall. It was constantly guarded, constant surveillance. And this wall really became the symbol of the Cold War. If you've ever heard the expression where Ronald Reagan says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. Well, the wall he's talking about is this wall right here that you see in the bottom right-hand corner, the Berlin Wall. Now, you're seeing here where it has all the spray paint on it, that's the western side. Okay, so artists would come and they would actually paint, pretty famous spray paint artists would come and they would do these like portrait type things on the wall. And basically the wall, when it was torn down, which we'll talk about because it gets torn down a bunch of years later, when it's torn down, a lot of the sections are actually still available for you to see. Some of them are actually considered artwork today. Okay, now there's one other thing that happens. Now, I have to scroll back here. I'm just going to go back. Remember here, okay, so take a look here, right? Now, in Berlin, right, so here's Berlin in the bottom right-hand corner. And remember, all of Western Berlin is surrounded by the Russians. So Stalin decides, because what used to happen is, if you look at this thing here, they would drive supplies in. Okay, so, think about like the LIE, right? So for Riverhead and you have to go into, say, New York, you take the LIE, you drive in. Well, what happens is Stalin is going to cut off the supplies to West Berlin. So what do? This is like a tennis match. Here's the first sort of step in this war. If you're the United States, what do? Do you give up Western Berlin? You just fought hard to keep it, right? Do you give up this very prime area here of West Berlin? How do you get supplies? Now, Stalin has cut off these supplies so they can basically take over Western Berlin. So what do? If you attack, you're talking about World War III. You're talking about nuclear war. You're talking about the end of the world. So how do you get supplies in? Well, the United States is going to fly planes. This was called the Berlin Airlift. So the U.S. flies planes in to Western Berlin, and they literally drop off supplies. They bring in tons and tons of supplies. Now, if you're Stalin, okay, so you've cut off Western Berlin. The U.S. has now answered. They've said, okay, well, we're going to fly planes in. What could you do if you're Stalin? You could shoot down one of those planes. But what happens if you shoot down one of those planes? You're talking about nuclear war. You're talking about the end of the world. That's a problem, right? So this is where this Cold War, you immediately see the problems that are going to happen here, okay? Because this is the first volley. Now, the U.S. wins this one because essentially they drop off so many supplies that Stalin has to take down this blockade and essentially just lets them, they were actually getting more supplies in using the planes. So they actually just let them go with the cars. But you can see this is a U.S. win, but the U.S. is going to lose a lot of these head-to-head battles. A lot of this is based on something called brinksmanship. The idea here is that these two forces are coming so close to each other. I know you can't see me right now, but I'm putting my hands really close together. Okay, and they're coming really close to hitting each other. And then at the last minute, they may pull away because they know if they let it go too far, you're talking about the end of the world. Okay, most of these, if they go wrong, you're talking about nuclear war and the end of the world. All right. If you have any questions, make sure you email me. Watch the links that I've supplied here. Okay, and then there is a worksheet to do. So you're going to make sure you do the worksheet. So fill that in. You're going to submit that, and tomorrow we'll be talking about a couple of important words: containment, NATO, the Warsaw Pact, and something called the arms race, which is an interesting thing that's going to happen. All right. Have a good day.